Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's 14:30. Welcome to our 52nd ECHO session. Today we have Mr. Mpanji Siwingwa from the UTH Laboratory. He mostly deals with viral loads. We are joined by most of our spokes. As you know, we are a bit overwhelmed, but welcome to all of you. If you can hear us, you can please wave. Okay. We acknowledge Ndola, we acknowledge Dr. Islam, who will be presenting the case for today. We acknowledge Chipata Central, Lewanika, Lundazi, Mongu, Material for one. But before we go into today's didactic, we'll allow Sister Priscilla to give us a very brief recap. My name is Sombo Folojishi, and I'm your facilitator for today.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Last week's ECHO session was on HIV self-testing. HIV self-testing was defined as a process in which a person collects his or her own specimen, performs a test, and interprets the results either alone or with someone he or she trusts. HIV self-testing was said to be a screening test, and that it should not be used to make a definitive HIV diagnosis. Reactive results from HIV self-testing require further testing from a trained provider in the facility using validated national testing algorithm. We also talked about the risk behaviors that would require repeat HIV self-testing. We also talked about the exclusion criteria for HIV self-testing. And then we also talked about the reasons why we offer HIV self-testing, that it is to close the testing gap and reach individuals not accessing traditional self-testing services. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to acknowledge you've been joined by Chilenge. I know James has joined us, Dr. Sangam. So we'll allow Dr. Mpanji to introduce himself as we share his presentation.
Can start. My name is Mpanji Siwingwa. I am from the Adult Center of Excellence Laboratory, just within UTH here. And we do mainly with HIV viral load and HIV drug resistance testing, but then we also do the rapid HIV test kits. And then for today, I am going to be presenting on the diagnosis of HIV-1 versus HIV-2 using rapid tests, getting it right. So in terms of our objectives today, we intend to look at 4 items today. One, we want to look at the approach for initial HIV testing. Then secondly, we will look at the epidemiology of HIV tests in sub-Saharan Africa. Then thirdly, we'll identify the factors that influence HIV test results. And then lastly, but not the least, we're going to identify strategies to accurately interpret test results. So in terms of our poll for today, they are going to be based on the photographic HIV GRT tests. So we'll look at pictures, and then we want to interpret how the pictures are coming out. So,
okay, thank you so much. So let's pay attention. This is just an array of rapid tests and possible results. A to E are regarded as straightforward. F to G are regarded as very difficult. So our first poll question is based on this. Carefully look at this line, because when you poll, you will not be able to see this. Concerning the interpretation of cassette E, this is a bioline, I believe, okay, which is confirmatory. How would you interpret this? Is it A, negative for HIV-2, B, invalid, C, positive for HIV-2? Please look at cassette E. It's very clear. I don't want to go through it. How would you interpret this? Is it positive for HIV-2, negative for HIV 2, or is it an invalid test? So I will just get to the polls. They are not coming. Set on that. The polls. Oh, they were hidden. Okay. There you go. Please go ahead and poll. I hope you have ability to poll AIDC where Dr. Chitalu is. I know because you are a co-host, you had issues. So I have some interesting answers coming up. Remember that the people that do this test in our facilities are community-based volunteers. So let them not do better than us. Huh? We see how hard their job is, okay? Yeah. So I'll just put this right up there. This is poll question 1. Is this test positive for HIV-2? Is it negative for HIV-2? Or is it invalid? So the control line, there's nothing. On the HIV-2, there's a deep red line. On HIV-1, there's nothing. So we have 6 people saying it's negative. They would report it as an HIV negative too. Some people would call it invalid. Other people would say that it's a positive for HIV too. Okay, I'll end the polling. This is so interesting. This is the work that our community-based volunteers are doing, right? So we have to do better than them. So some people would report this as negative, but there's a line at 2. Some people would say this is a positive test because there's a line at 2. Some people would say it's an invalid. I think I'm going to end the poll now so that we can go to the next poll question. Okay. So poll question 2. Okay. So there is poll question 2, more cassettes. Concerning interpretation of this cassette, how would you interpret it? Positive for both HIV-1 and 2. Positive for HIV-2. Positive for HIV-1. Okay, so I'll share the poll. We can vote. How would we interpret this one that we are seeing right here? Is it positive for HIV-1 and 2? Okay, some people say it's positive for both 1 and 2. Is it positive for HIV-2? Is it positive for only HIV-1? This is hard. Okay, so the control is a deep red color. There is a faint line on the HIV-2 line, and there's a deep red, okay? So you have coloration at both 2 and 1. 2 is very faint, 1 is a deep color. So those are the results. Mpanji, it's positive for HIV-1 and 2, is what some people would tell me, and me, I'll pick that result and act on it. Some people will tell me this is a patient with HIV-2. Others will say this is only HIV-1. Okay. I hope, Senanga, we have polled. There's a lot of movement in that poll. I assume we have polled. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. This is how we voted. Most people feel that this is a positive test for both 1 and 2. Okay. Remember, these tests are done by our community-based volunteers. This is our third poll question. How would you interpret this one? Is it positive for both? Is it positive only one? Okay, we can look at that and vote. I'll try to move this. Yeah. Okay, is this 1 and 2, or is it 1 and 2, but you need to confirm 2? Or is it positive for HIV-1? We need more votes. Just vote. You know, when I'm voting on the other side, they usually get it wrong. But anyway. Okay, I can see Precious. I assume Precious and team have voted. Okay. So some people, 89% of the people feel that it's positive for 1 and 2, actually. A few of the people feel it's positive for both, but they would want to confirm 2. While some people, no one feels that it's positive for HIV-1. So at least that's a bit of a relief. Mpanji will talk about this a bit later. This is how we polled. Most of us feel it's positive for both. Well, there's a small percentage, 5 people feel that it is positive for both, but they would want to confirm the 2. Okay? Thank you so much. We'll go to the didactic.
Thank you very much for that. And we hope that during the presentation that most of the issues will be clarified, and we hope to at least improve on how we interpret our results. Yeah, so in terms of epidemiology of HIV-1 and 2, so HIV-1 obviously it's everywhere, it's worldwide. But then for HIV-2, it's common in West Africa. So you find it in countries like Benin, Senegal, Cameroon, and countries like that. But then in terms of but then for the age group, in terms of the highest prevalence for HIV-1, it's found between 20 to 34 years old. And then for HIV type 2 is for those who are between 40 to 55. Then in terms of global burden, as you can see on the screen, it's very rare that we are going to find HIV type 2. That's why even if you look at the figures that are there, it's pretty low. So you have to be mindful that the most common type for HIV is type 1, but then type 2 is very, very rare, as you can see from the figures. Then in terms of the transmission routes, the routes are still the same. It's high and it's between 20 to 40%. Then for type 2, it's from 1 to 4%. In terms of the receptors that are used for HIV-1, we only have CCR5 and CXCR4. Then we have got a lot of receptors for HIV type 2. We've got CCR5, CXCR4, and CCT-5, GPR15, and CCR6. Then in terms of diversity, as you can see from the graph, so HIV has got 2 subtypes, actually 3 subtypes. We've got M and O, and then the majority of the HIV subtypes are found in the M subtypes. And all those that you are seeing at the bottom are the other subtypes for subtype M. But then for HIV type 2, it's only got the groups, and these are the groups that you have for HIV type 2. Then in terms of the genes for HIV-1 and 2, they both have 9 genes. All of them are the same, except that for HIV type 1, we've got the VPU gene. Then for HIV type 2, you've got the VPX gene. That's a difference which is there. And then in terms of the testing algorithm for HIV, this is a new testing algorithm. You are going to see it in the 2020 Zambia Consolidated Guidelines. But then the biggest difference is that you are going to see the self-testing kits now are very much defined in the guidelines. And the way you approach it also is very clear in the diagram. So if you look at the way the diagram is coming out is that if you're using, first of all, let me start with the negatives. If you're using the HIV self-test kit and it comes out negative, it's pretty much straightforward. It's not complicated, but then the challenge comes in if a patient is reactive. So if a patient is reactive for HIV self-testing kit, then you have to go back to the universal routine testing. So, and I think majority of us do know that, but then the point is that once that patient is positive for self-test kit, then you actually now go through the cascade where you test using determine. If they are reactive, then you use a confirmatory test for BioLine. But then the take-home message again is that for patients that test HIV positive, you have to make sure that you index case for HIV testing. But then the other issue also is that for patients who who test positive, like we are going to see in the next slide for either HIV type 1 and HIV type 2, we are going to clarify in the next slides. But then in terms of the testing procedure for HIV, I've tried to summarize it so that I don't bring a lot of complication in the whole thing, but I think we all know the basics. So when the patient comes in there, we obviously are going to prick the patient with a lancet that comes into the box for that particular test. But then it is important that we clean the finger while we're going to do the pricking, and especially also on the issue of drawing the sample volumes. So in the box, we've got the capillary pipette. So you just have to make sure that as you are getting the blood reaches the full line. There's a full line that is defined on the capillary pipette, and then you transfer that blood on the testing cassette or the bioline, the determined kit that you are using. So then when you're using the determined kit, obviously the number of drops, you're going to find the buffer solutions in there. So you use at least 4 drops of the buffer vertically and you put it onto the specimen bottle. Sorry, testing cassette. But then the issue also is that there's a window period that the manufacturer has put there, and we have to pay attention to it. So results can only be read between 10 to 20 minutes. We do not recommend that you read results after 20 minutes. So that time you have to pay attention to that. But then in terms of the next slide, we're just going to look through some of the results, how they come out. So what is important is that if a result comes out negative, the only thing that is there is a control line. So if the test results comes out negative, you have to see the control line. Please take note of that. The control line has to be seen, and it has to be well defined, as you can see on the diagram. But then if you go to the other slides, I hope I'll not lose anyone here, but then the point is that we are going to have 2 scenarios, whether it's for HIV 1 or HIV 2. We are going to have situations whereby we are going to have 2 positive, two lines for positive results. By 2 will either be on the line for 1 or the line for 2. So now, if you look at the graph that I've presented before you, is that you are going to have the first scenario, which is positive, is that you are going to have either on the 1 or the 2, the line is going to be very strong, as strong as the control line. But then there's also another second scenario, is that you're going to have a line which has got, in terms of the burnt intensity, it's medium, not very bright, but it's just in between right there. But then it still implies that that patient is still positive. Then the last third scenario is that the patient is going to have like a weak or a faint line. It's fainter than the control line, but still that patient is still HIV positive. So please make sure that you pay attention to this one. So this scenario applies both to HIV type 1 and type 2.
So if you have the line only on the 1 or the 2, the intensity doesn't matter. No. It reads as positive.
No, it reads as positive.
Okay.
Yeah. So then we are going to have a third scenario. I think that's where there are a lot of issues here. So now on this slide, we are going to have a situation whereby if you look at the control line, I hope everybody can see that the control line and the type 1, the burn's intensity is the same. But if you look at the line on 2, the intensity is very faint. So this to you implies to you that this patient is only positive for HIV type 1, but not for type 2. So this is a false positive type 2. Please make sure that you get this right. Then you can also have the same situation for type 2. You can have a line, on the same one. We can have a line on type 2, which is very, very bright, as good as the control line, but then very faint on the type 1 line. But then that means that that patient is actually HIV type 2, but then the line for type 1 is just a false type. Yeah. Okay. Then on this slide, you will see that all the 3 lines, the band intensity is actually the same. It looks exactly the same, the intensity is the same, and everything is the same. So the kit actually tells you that this patient actually has got HIV type 1 and type 2. But then remember, in our current settings, HIV type 2 is very rare. So that's why we are recommending that you verify that the band for type 2 is actually type 2. I hope that clarifies issues. Then for the invalid result, so ideally the main purpose of the control is to make sure that everything is working well in terms of the buffers, the way you collected samples and everything. But then if the band for the invalid result has got no line for the control, like in this case there, it means that there's something wrong and the test result is invalid. So all the time for your result to be valid, you have to see a band line on the control line, as you can see on the diagram. Okay, so in terms of the factors that actually affect the testing of HIV test kits, I think the first one is very obvious. These kits are meant to, they target the antibodies, but usually during the window period, the antibodies are not fully developed. So when you are doing a test result for someone who is just within that window period, you'll not be able to get or capture the antibodies when you are doing that test. But I think what is also very key is the competence of a tester. So the tester is supposed to be competent to do all the processes that are involved in HIV testing. And the next two slides actually are addressed to address number two on the competence of the tester, why it is important. But then thirdly, the storage of the kit. When you get the kit, the manufacturer actually puts at what temperature do you put the kits and how do you store your kits. So usually these kits actually, they were supposed to be kept at freeze temperature, but then you have to make sure that you store them at that temperature. Your temperature shouldn't exceed above 30 degrees, because if it does, then you're going to have issues with your results. Then lastly, obviously the quality of a specimen is very important. If you collect, if a sample comes in and it's in a red top, you can't use that blood to test for HIV test. You can only get the serum, not the blood, because the blood already clotted in there. If you use it, it's going to affect the way the results come out. You can only use blood in the EDTA bottles. So you have to make sure that you pay attention to those small but important details. Then in the next slide, this data was gotten from the Rapid Test Continuous Quality Improvement Program 2019. So this is where we are right now. So the figures are not so good, but the issue is that if you look at the distribution of, let's say Lusaka, so only 78% of people who tested Lusaka are competent or certified to do the testing in Lusaka. Then if you look at Copper Belt, it's even pretty low. We're talking of 38%. So we don't know what the other 72% is doing and how the results are coming out. But then the take-home message is that all the facilities, we have to make sure that we make use of this, the RTCQI program, that we also get interested in making sure that the person who's testing and the facility where that testing is being done, they are actually certified for conducting HIV testing there. But then if we break it down to the cadres that are actually doing the testing, not to put the community-based volunteers on the spot, but I think if you look at the graph, over 50% of the people who participated in the competence certification, over 50% of them failed, and it is very worrying. So there's need for us to do the root cause analysis. Why are we getting this? Is it because people are not being trained properly? Or is it because the people are going there to train? I don't know what the issue is, but we need to get to the root bottom of this whole issue and figure out what the issue is. But then if you look at other cadres, people failed here and there, like for the nurses, but at least you can see that there's some improvement, but we need to do better, because even there also the percentage is also a bit high. Yeah, so we just have to make sure the people are testing, know aware about this program, and then as well as the facilities, so that we start pushing out for people to be enrolled in this program and see where you are in terms of your performance as a facility. Then this paper was done in Indonesia. So what they did in this paper is that they used photographic HIV DRT results to see the impact of training of the testers before and after. So they got the non-laboratory personnel, laboratory operators, and pathologists. But then if you look at this graph, you can see that there is actually an improvement after testing. If you look at the black lines, rather, for let's say non-laboratory personnel, they were 68.9%, but then after the training, they jumped to 91, about 92% in terms of interpreting results correctly. So it's important that people are trained, and as you can see from this graph, how that all the cadres here, there was actually an improvement, and it is important that we also start doing that. So then this is just a reminder of what we had before in terms of cassettes, and then we'll get back to this one. Then we can go to the next slide. So, yeah. Sorry? Okay, so then if you look at these cassettes, if you look at E, for instance, like we were saying in the slides, the control line is not there. So it means that the reagents had an issue, or the way the samples were collected had an issue. So that's why E is an invalid result, because the test is not valid because the control line is not there. Yeah. Then if you look at the others, if you look at F, the burnt intensity of the control line and the HIV type 1 line, the intensity is the same, but then you've got a faint line, which is 2 there. So then this is just HIV type 1 because 2 is just a false HIV type 2. Then lastly, if you look at number A, in terms of interpretation, all the lines are positive for 1 and 2, but then the issue is that in our scenario, HIV, dual infection of HIV1 and HIV2 is very rare. That's why we're recommending that you do another test for HIV type 2. Yeah. So in terms of summary key points for today, one is that we are advocating for training and certification of all essentials in the quality of HIV results. So number one is that they have to enroll for the EQA program, which is done, I think, twice or so in a year. So each facility is supposed to be enrolled in that. Then an erroneous diagnosis has great consequences for patients and may be averted by having some patients repeated by a qualified lab person. Then thirdly, remember that the correct interpretation of positive results, that is for 2 lines or 3 lines. You have to make sure that you remember all those 3 scenarios. And then lastly, HIV2 still remains rare in Zambia, and any positive results will need to be reconfirmed. These are my references, and these are my contact details.
So thank you so much, Mpanji. We'll allow a few minutes for any comments, any questions from the network. Dr. Bosco, any comments? Any experiences with HIV2, anywhere you've been?
Thank you very much. I hope you're getting me there.
Yes, yes.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Yes, the experience we've been having is, yes, we have seen a lot of fake HIV positive elsewhere where we go around, and in some facilities where we found like more than 40 patients with HIV type 2, and we decided to repeat all of them, and all of them were actually type 1.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Sorry, I think Bosco's bandwidth is low.
So I think that's a serious concern. It's a serious concern for.
Okay. So Dr. Bosco is just telling us his experiences. Okay.
Question?
Yes, you can.
Dr. Bosco, a quick one, maybe just out of interest, would you know why that is the case? Is it because people are not trained, or what do you think is the reason why that is the case in your facility?
Okay, I think I can highlight some few reasons, which are, I think one of them is some people are using wrong buffers. When there's no buffer, they use normal saline, they use any other solution. Some are not using the timer, so they don't follow the
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Bosco. We'll let Mungu go ahead with their comment. But in Mpanji, there's a question that says, okay, yeah, you have a faint line. Can you explain it to them why you have what causes that faint line that should not be interpreted in the case where you may have just a one deep, then the faint line? What causes that is the question.
Yeah, so if you look at the, so if you look at the, like I was saying, I was doing a presentation in the slide. So HIV type 1 and type 2, they are very similar. And they are pretty much using the antibodies to detect whether it's for HIV type 1 and type 2. So the reason why that one is coming out because of the similarities that are there between 1 and 2. And then our manufacturers have not really developed a kit that is very robust enough such that it's just specifically for 1 and it doesn't like give out a false positive for that one. That's why the only way at this particular time is that's for us to differentiate based on their intensity because of the similarities that are there between HIV-1 and HIV.
I may only have HIV-1, but because of the gene pool, I'm sure you saw some are similar. They may give you something showing on the HIV-2 line, which is false. Okay? Because there's cross-reactivity between the two lines. We'll let the HM...
Good afternoon.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is based on the positive results for both HIV-1 and HIV-2 on the ST bioline. The presenter said when you have such results, you have to confirm further for type 2. Now, our question is, do we need to use again ST bioline or which test and how do we go about it? Thank you.
Great question. So the issue is that for the recommended test for confirming or verifying for HIV test kits, actually there are two types. You can use the Western blotting for HIV, for differentiating whether it's HIV-1 and HIV-2. And I think most blood banks in Zambia, they actually have got that test for Western blotting. So you can actually do that to differentiate whether it's for HIV-1 or HIV type 2. But then the issue also is that there's also another one, the PCR one, which is not common, but again, it's based on the availability of a test at a particular lab. But at this particular time, I would just recommend for Western blotting because it's common in most blood banks in Zambia.
I think that's a very good question. But what I do in my practice, because I can't even remember what a Western blot is I repeat the test myself.
Sure.
And read it with somebody from the lab. And most of them have turned out to be false positive HIV-2s.
Sure.
Then you can end there, because usually it's an issue of misinterpretation.
Sure.
But if the two are very, very dark, then you can proceed to Western blotting. Sure. We expect this to be very rare. Railway, please go ahead with your question. Railway?
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Thank you. Our question was on the front line on the controller. I saw from those from the presentation, I think should have been G where the control was faint. How do you interpret that one?
When the control is faint, when the control is faint. What's your name again? What if the control is failed? I'm sure you heard what I said. F and G are considered very difficult, so we decided not to talk about it. But the question is here, so we'll talk about it.
Yeah. So, so I think the number one issue also is that I want to be very practical also, because if you look at the manufacturer's recommendation, you hardly would see a sample coming. But however, there are studies that have been done where the control line was faint, but then the other bands were stronger, and those results were said to be positive. Regardless, so long that you're able to see the control line, there is a band. It's valid, actually, it's valid. So long you're not imagining that the control is there, but you see a faint control line there, is still valid. So those cases will be there, very rare, but then you will still find them there because there are studies that have done on such cases, so it's still valid.
I hope that's clear, Dr. Ndindi. We expect the control line to be deep. In some situations, it may be faint. This is rare. However, you can still read that as a valid line. Duncan, are you trying to say something, or you are just waving? Okay. I know there's another hand that's waving. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Chanda.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Quite some learning, even from my point of view. But I think what's worrisome is the same issue of having too many positives, so-called false positive, or at least who are labeled as such. Do you have an idea as a country how many people now?
I like that question, Duncan, because I've been asking this since you've been preparing this presentation, and Mpanji hasn't told me. So, do we have numbers for our country?
Yeah, that's a tough one, but I don't have it like in writing. But what I know is that from my consultation, it's not, you won't find it in white and black written down, but what I know is that roughly about 4%, 3 to 4% of our patients probably have HIV type 2. But then other countries like in Mozambique and South Africa, the percentage is quite actually low.
Yes. Yeah. So it's interesting that you asked that, Duncan, because there's a paper that was published after, I think, one of the big studies, and they reported an HIV-2 prevalence of 4%.
Yes.
When we went deeper to look at the methods that were used in this study, they were slightly questionable, so we do not regard this as reliable. It's something maybe Zambia can look at, otherwise we do not have any reliable data. It may have been a falsely high positive, because remember, the people who were doing these tests were CBVs, and you can see how they performed. When we tried to test them, more than 50% of them did not do well. So that's why we did not put up any Zambian data. We place it at about 4%, but we think it's much, it's too high, actually. It must be much lower in the 0.1s, but that's a great question. So Dr. Islam, are you ready to share your slides as we take the last question? Please share your slides. I think I saw another hand. Can you look for it, please? Dr. Islam, and share your case. Dr. Islam? Hi, Dr. Islam.
Hello.
Hi. We'll share the case from our side. Is that okay?
Maybe you can, is it possible from there to share, because I'm unable, let me check.
Okay. We've shared it, Dr. Islam. Please go ahead with your presentation.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead. Dr. Islam, go ahead.
I'm getting, but the slide need to... Hello. Yeah, okay. Upstairs. Good afternoon.
Hi, Dr. Islam.
Yeah, this is Dr. Islam. I'm from Chifundo Clinic. Today I'm presenting the case. Again, okay. So my case is a male, 48 years old, is single, truck driver, alcoholic, and presented with 6 months history of skin rash, recurrent diarrhea, weight loss, and numbness of legs. His HIV was diagnosed in August 2013. That time he presented with axillary abscess and initiated on Tioli and cotrimoxazole. He had a history of TB twice, once in 2011. That time he was pre-art, and the second one is 2018 February. He developed a peripheral neuropathy for which he took diclofenac very often since September 2018. In February 2019, ERT was modified to abacavir, lamivudine, and efavirenz due to renal dysfunction. He was enrolled in enhanced adherence counseling May 2019 based on high viral load and poor adherence. Should I continue?
Yes, Doc.
His physical examination was temperature was 36.2 degrees centigrade, and blood pressure was 120/87 millimeter of mercury. Pulse was 81 per minute. Respiratory rate 17 breaths per minute. Weight was 48 kilogram. His height was 1.62 centimeter. His BMI was recorded. Slide was not too clear. He was wasted, pale, not jaundice, no lymph nodes were palpable. He developed, there was PP, pruritic papular eruption on both upper limbs and chest wall. His chest was clinically clear, heart sound was regular, abdomen was soft, and no organomegaly. His sensory and motor function were intact. The ART regimen, initially he started with TAOLI, what he continued up to from August 28 August 2013 to 14 February 2019. Then it was modified to ABC 3TC and efavirenz due to renal insufficiency, what he continued up to 5th November. And due to high viral load, after enhanced adherence counseling, if the viral load was still high, then he was modified to AZT 3TC and lopinavir. Now, if we will look at the lab results, that he had history of TB twice, where the smear result were not documented. Is both time it was based on chest X-ray. And HIV test, as he did it first at 2013, where it wasn't documented as type 1 or type 2. So there is the thing which we did repeated on 5th November. As we said that it looks like HIV-2. Then the viral load, at first it was done on 13th May 2019, which one the result came out as 47,561 copies per mil. After enhanced adherence counseling, it was repeated on 1st November, which came out 107,067 copies per mil. His CD4 count, the baseline was 150, and it raised up to 234, which one is 2014. Then it has been dropping, like the latest one, it was on 14th May 2019, it dropped to 70 cells per microliter. His RPR was reactive at 2015. Then that time he was being treated with benzathine penicillin. After that, it was repeated this year, May 2019, when it came out non-reactive. The creatinine level, the time he started ART, it was normal, 89.88. If we see the results, the creatinine was increasing in 2019, this year, February, when we documented is 338.81. And that's the time his ART regimen was changed to ABC-based regimen. And we have observed that he's been taking, because of he had a history of TB in that period when the same year what he completed, and after that he developed neuropathy and he's been taking the diclofenac without any prescription from the nearest chemist. So his creatinine level is going, like it wasn't improving as you have seen the results. We repeated in March, it was 329.67, then May it was 308.68, and then October 2019 it's 435.2. And his creatinine clearance also, if you can see the creatinine clearance from February 2019, it was 15.15, it has dropped to 12.45. The liver function test, it was on enrollment, it was 18.1, and the latest one, 23.5. That is ALT. AST also is in the baseline, it was 27.8, and hepatitis B surface antigen, what came out non-reactive. And if we see the hemoglobin on the baseline, like 2013, it was 11.5. It raised up to 15.6 on 2014. Then it has been dropped. 14th May 2019, it's dropped to 8.3 gram per deciliter.
Next slide, time.
So our questions were, how should we interpret the viral load results in view of this HIV-2, what was the repeat test was showing, and what should be the best drug regimen for this patient with HIV-2 CKD and the treatment failure, taking into account that the quite pill burden. And when we repeated the test, this was the result, the picture what is showing down, how should we interpret it, and any change in the management of the same patient.
Thank you so much, Dr. Islam. We'll allow a few questions from the network. Essentially, we have a 48-year-old male, HIV positive, presented with severe weight loss. He was underweight, diarrhea, weight loss, PPE, and numbness of the lower limbs. He has a history of having TB in 2011 and 2018, test X-ray diagnosis. For his peripheral neuropathy, he has decided to self-medicate with diclofenac since 2018. When seen in February this year, they noted that he had renal failure, therefore they gave him a backup 3TC and efavirenz. A few months later, the facility decided to retest him for HIV, and they found that he had HIV-2 monoinfection. They have enrolled him in ESC, but it seems his viral load kept on increasing. It did not reduce. Of note is that he had PPE and was underweight. On the labs, essentially his creatinine clearance now sits at 15. Please take note that he's had renal dysfunction for more than 3 months. I think that's why they refer to the patient as CKD. He also has a mild anemia of 8.3. Currently, the patient is on AZT, 3TC, lopinavir. The lopinavir was decided on based on the fact that he had an HIV-2 and the fact that he was also failing. Their questions to us are, how should they interpret this HIV-2 monoinfection that I believe it's a psychosocial counselor that did this test actually, because I went to see this patient myself. How should they interpret this HIV-2 monoinfection, but they have a viral load of 10,000? Okay, that's our question. Number two, what if you had to put together a drug, assuming this HIV-2 was true, what would you put together for this patient? Bear in mind that there is pill burden involved. They repeated the test and they found that the HIV-2 was a faint line and the HIV-1 was a dark line. It was a valid result, the control was there. Now that we know this, would we have managed this patient differently? Any questions? There are two participants, please unmute them. Please go ahead with your question. I can see hands there. Lewanika, let Lewanika. Lewanika, please go ahead with your question.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes, the question is on when they switched from TLE to ABC3Ts and the EFP. Was there an adjustment to Lamivudine?
That's a great question. Lewanika is asking Dr. Islam, did you adjust the lamivudine when you took to abacavir 3TC efavirenz?
That time, looking at the creatinine clearance, we adjusted, but sometimes we had the challenge that 3TC, we don't have the separate. So it's very difficult to adjust 3TC unless you have the separate. If we had separate, it would be easy to calculate. So that is another challenge I can say top of it. That is quite difficult. It's not coming in separate bottle, it's come together with the abacavir.
Okay, that's a good question, and that's a good, it's a real challenge in facilities. So usually we tend to ignore the 3TC. I think what Lewanika is trying to say, that if we have very low creatinine clearance of 15, we also have to renally adjust the lamivudine. Thank you so much. There's a question that says, why didn't you use TAF, Dr. Islam? Why didn't you use TAF?
TAF was not available.
Okay. So, okay, it says it's because it's not available. But when we go into the breakout rooms, I'm sure very interesting things will come up about TAF. Do we have any other questions? Any question in here? Any questions? St. Luke's, please ask your question.
How are you? I'm fine, Wasan. How are you?
Fine.
Please mute St. Luke's. Go ahead with your question.
Afternoon once again.
Good afternoon.
I think my question is based on the previous, sorry, it's a follow-up question. I'm so sorry to take you back. We wanted to find out if, for example, I'm in a rural area where I can't do PCR, or I can do the other test to confirm HIV-2. Do I need to use SD bioline, or I have to send the sample to somewhere where the confirmatory test can be done with either PCR or with the other test? Thank you.
Confirm yourself.
Yeah, so I think what is critical at this point, even before you start sending a sample, is that from your facility, you have to confirm that actually the patient has got type 2 there. Because if you've got 3 bands and then there's one faint line in between, then definitely there's no, you can't just say that there's no infection. So that aspect has to be confirmed from the facility. If you yourself, you're unable to confirm from that facility, if you're able to seek help from the people from the lab within your vicinity or your facility, that would be great. Then if all of you from within your facility and maybe even the lab person confirms that that's HIV type 1, that's when now you consider sending it to a blood bank, your nearest blood bank, for Western blotting for type 2.
It's clear now, St. Luke's, isn't it? You have to engage your lab personnel, because you can imagine where Dr. Bosco found 40 HIV-2s. If they sent us all those samples for Western blotting, and we come and tell you that they are O1s, then you have a problem. So you need to work with the lab. We are now going into the breakout rooms for further discussion. As we are doing that, please go ahead.
Yeah, when I looked at the photo of the test slips, I thought HIV type 2 strip was faint. Wasn't it?
Yes.
So why is it that it was being suspected that the client had HIV type 2?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the first test was done by a psychosocial counselor. The second test I went to do, and that's what we found. So the patient was being treated as an HIV-2. When we did it again, that's what we found.
Okay.
So now we are asking you, when you go in your group, to discuss, now that it looks like that, should we have treated the patient differently in the first place? We will go into the breakout rooms.
Hello. Network.
you feel it's better than, okay, that's fine. So when they repeated the tests, this is what they found. Yes. This is what they found. Can you see that?
Yes.
Kilenge, would you like to comment?
This is
What?
type 1.
Say that again?
This is type 1, not type 2.
Okay. So they repeated the test and they found that this is type 1. Then what? What do we do now?
Yes.
So we have the comments here. Go ahead.
What it means is that
just pull it.
What it means is that there must have been an adherence problem because they were treating with the right regimen, but then the patient was still failing.
Okay. Okay. So the thing is that they feel that the Abacavir PTC or TLE was correct actually. It was a marker of poor adherence because it was actually a type 1, which makes a lot of sense. Do we have any comments from Chilenge? I know Andrew, please go ahead with your comments. Andrew? Raising his hand. Okay. Maybe. Choma, any comments on this case?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Choma.
I'm doubting you. Edgar,
you have a comment on this case? Chilenge, any comment on this case? Chilenge?
Dr. Sombos.
Yes.
On which one? Question 1, question 2.
Whichever one you feel like, because we've had comments on everything, but would you like to polish up on anything? How would you interpret the viral load result in view of the HIV tool? What is the best drug? Or this is what they found?
I think this is Dr. Chua. So as everyone has said, with this patient, we didn't really point to the type of regimen he was on, but maybe adherence could have been considered. Looking at how what he does with the truck driver, I think with the first one, adherence should have been considered.
Okay, so they should have thought of poor adherence, which it seems that they did. Remember, they enrolled him on enhanced adherence counseling, but his viral load kept rising. It's like the enhanced adherence counseling made him worse. Okay, anything else on this case?
Can we go back?
Anything else? Okay, we'll let the people in the hub comment as people. Just raise your hand if you have something to say on this. On mute. Oh, it was pressed. Sorry, the question here from the hub, what's your name, sir?
Clarion Mwamba.
From Clarion Mwamba is, can our current viral load machines pick HIV-2 viral load? Eh?
Yes.
Can they?
No.
No, they can't.
Yes, so.
Uh-huh.
I think that's why probably from the question 1, it was clear that we are dealing with the case of HIV type 1.
Okay, so this should have helped us conclude that there's a problem, isn't it? Because for you to get 10,000, it means it's counting 10,000 HIV-1.
Yes.
Well, as opposed to a test where the psychosocial said, no, this is HIV-2. Ideally, they wouldn't have picked the viral load, isn't it? So that's a very intelligent observation. So we have that. Are we okay with that? What Mr. Mwamba has said? That for us to have seen that high viral load, the viral load machines we have only look for HIV-1. So that 10,000 by default implies that this patient had an HIV-1. Okay, so we should have questioned that result. That should have been how we interpreted it. And as people have been saying, we should have questioned these patients' adherence instead of going to be retesting the patient. That was a wrong move. So we have Nakambala, please go ahead. Nakambala.
Hello, Nakambala on?
Yes, Nakambala is on.
Yes, I would rather to add on the issue of adherence. In being an alcoholic and being a truck driver, there are chances that the client was not complying to treatment. And when you look at the duration from the first viral load, which was done in May, the second one was done after 6 months. Meaning that at least if we could have made a quick enhanced adherence from the first viral load, we could have known whether the client was complying or not. But in the STEM, it's just saying enhanced adherence. For how long? We don't know whether it was just for 1 session or for 7 sessions or any about even 5 sessions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. That's an interesting observation. Eh? Like your time to the enhanced adherence should be very short from when you receive the viral load. But this sometimes the facility it may be out of their control, because sometimes you get a viral load that comes in 6 months later. That's when you realize that, we have a problem. But that's a very, very intelligent observation. Abraham Piri.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Yes, Abraham. Go ahead.
I just want to find out. Maybe I didn't get you clearly. Did you say
yes, Abraham?
Our machines can't detect viral load for type 2? Hello?
No. No, it can't.
It can't for type 2?
No.
Just for type 1?
Just for type 1, yes.
Okay.
Abraham, can I ask you a question?
Ask.
If you were asked to pick a machine that detects viral load, HIV-1 viral load, or a machine that picks HIV-2 viral load? If you were told that you are in charge, pick one machine, which one would you pick?
I can go for 1. Exactly,
and that's why we picked for 1, isn't it? Because it's common. It's a big public health issue. You would not pick an HIV-2 viral load machine, even if it was cheap, because we know very few patients will use it. It's okay, Abraham?
Yes, it's fine.
Thanks, Abraham. What's happening? Okay. Okay, so people have any other suggestions? Would you really like to use Abacava again in a patient that's failing? Because this is the answer we are going to say at we found. Okay? Would you agree?
No.
Go on.
Hello, good afternoon. This is Senanga HNP student.
Yes, Senanga.
Yes. Sorry.
Senanga, please go ahead before we are closed out. Okay, we'll let Mr. Mwamba talk. Please go ahead.
I think for me, that reminds me of...
Speaker.
For me, that reminds me of a certain scenario that I encountered, probably where I worked. This is a patient who was the TND, non-detectable viral load, but the patient was failing clinically. But upon investigating further, we discovered that the patient has also type 2. So I think it reminds me. And also, what made us go further to do a retest, because we did a CD4, the CD4 was actually low. So we discovered and evaluated to say what this patient, despite the thyroid being non-detectable, he had HIV too.
Okay, so are we hearing that? That's so important what he's saying. Did we hear that? I think what he's suggesting is we should not quickly rush to say, let me check for 2 if someone is failing. Do the simple things first. Check your viral load. If it's high, really, HIV2 should not be an issue. CD4 is low, so if you are non-detectable, CD4 is low, you are still showing AIDS. Then you can start saying, are these drugs really working? What's making this person have AIDS, but the viral load is low, and the test is just positive? That's when they went and retested. Because now you have another HIV at play. Okay, so it's not indicated as a first line. The moment you see AIDS and whatever and high viral load, you retest. You have a lot of false positives. Okay. What the drug regime, I think I'm not happy. It is our nekera when we go back to the bedroom. Can you use a backup 3TC in someone who's failing? I think South told us that we can't. Okay? That's why the facility went for AZT 3TC. But do you people think dolutegravir has a role?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm literally hearing Sao saying yes. So Sao says we could have used DTG in this patient. We could have even used something like DTG with atazanavir. Those would have been new. Atazanavir is 1 tablet, DTG plus 3TC. You know, your pill burden is more friendly. They avoided atazanavir because they were told it's HIV too. Or you could have gone with AZT 3TC with DTG. That would have been very nice. I know people tend to worry about AZT, but can I ask a question? Why do you think this patient had renal failure? Sao, you want to say something?
No, I was just looking. The advantage of DTG based on the session months ago, DTG doesn't care if it's HIV1 or HIV2.
Exactly. Exactly. So for this patient, instead of going for your PI, you would have gone to DTG and suppressed him very quickly, because DTG works very well, whether it's 1 or 2, and it has an excellent pill burden. Just one pill, and you are good to go. So it would have been an excellent choice. You could have gone with AZT 3TC with DTG, or DTG plus 3TC with an atazanavir. Okay? Remember that DTG now will be in our first line, our second line, and third line. So please feel free to use it. Don't withhold it from patients. There's something else that came up. Why do we think this patient had kidney failure? Okay? Because that would have helped you whether you should adjust your AZT or Abacava. Why do we think this patient had kidney failure? Before I go to Mr. Mwamba here, who's just firing answers. Why do we think this patient had renal failure? But Lucas Banda.
No, what you said could also be a point, because this client was on TDF and the issues of alcohol.
Okay, so you think the TDF could have caused the renal failure? That's a good one. Anything else? Anything else? Lucas, we'll be doing echo in Nyanja now. Lucas. Okay, we'll spare you at next railway. So they've given us one. One of them could have been the TDF, could have pushed him into renal failure. The only problem is that his creatinine continued going up, even when they withdrew the TDF. Did you notice? It moved to 400 from 200 to 300. So it becomes difficult to blame TDF. It could have contributed, but it continued to rise. Okay? Abacava, they modified in February. But look, in May, it comes back, and in October, it's even higher, despite not having TDF. But that's a very good observation. But railway, I think Naimo Mukambeko went.
One suggestion was excessive alcohol consumption.
Okay, excessive alcohol. That's a good one. Does excessive alcohol cause renal insufficiency? But something connected to that, eh? It can, but very rare unless you have sepsis, because alcohol likes the liver more than the kidney, isn't it?
Sure.
Alcohol tends to like the liver, but someone who's excessively drinks, they may not be drinking enough water. But in line with what you've said, it can cause the peripheral neuropathy or worsen it. Eh? Remember, you had peripheral neuropathy. There's a hand. Okay, but railway will come back. That's an interesting. The alcohol is very, very interesting. But patients, but HNP, we will spare the railway and Boseka, but we'll combine the two answers. I like the line of. But patients, aren't you supposed to close the breakout rooms?
Yes.
Okay. But patients in the sun.
Hello. Yeah, I think it was diclofenac contributed.
There you go. This man continued to take diclofenac because he had the peripheral neuropathy from being an alcoholic and using those TB drugs. Goes into peripheral neuropathy, what does he do? Diclofenac, diclofenac, diclofenac. You stop the TDF, he continues the diclofenac. The renal function keeps going bad. So the alcohol makes the peripheral neuropathy worse. He continues to take the diclofenac and he continues being pushed into renal failure. Excellent, well done. I think we're a great team. Awesome. We are going back to I think it is Asha Inago, but I hope David, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. We can go back.
We'll be taken back to that area.
Chanda.
Dr. Sobo, welcome back. Oh, it's
I should be welcoming you. Okay, so let's do this.
Yeah. So we had a very fruitful discussion with our experts here, and I think what we generally agreed was that this patient there's a high likelihood that it's HIV-1, and that he is failing.
Okay.
On the regime that he was on.
Okay.
As the patient has chronic kidney disease and he will require adjustments. And for us to be able to find the right choice of drugs, we will need to do genotype so that we know which drugs are actually efficacious in this patient, and to be able to decide which one is going to work very well for him. Then we said we needed to consider that his diarrhea, which has been recurring, it needs to be investigated, and we need to treat the diarrhea because whatever regime we're going to put him on might not be getting therapy doses because of the diarrhea and the malabsorption that the patient is experiencing.
Okay.
And that we should be very cautious when we begin retreatment of the patient because we need to look out for iris, and that there may be diseases like TB that may actually reoccur right now that we need to think about. And also, the patient may actually, there's a history of alcohol, and so we need to consider that as well. Another important issue was his social issues. We didn't really have a lot of information regarding his social support, so we're not too sure if he's actually taking the medication. So that needs to be done better. I think all in all, there's patients who need to be managed very closely with a specialist support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Koza. You bring up some very interesting points. I feel like you're speaking to the future guidelines, where you say we should ask for a genotype in this guy. But remember, he only started the regime like 5th November, right? So you can have an idea of what can work without a genotype, but I agree with you. We'll now be doing genotypes on patients like him. So you're looking into the future. It's interesting you talked about the diarrhea and malabsorption, because that one, once you hit it with effective ART, he will probably do fine. I'm not sure if Lopiniva is the best. I agree with you. You hit the nail on the head, and this team kept on talking about the adherence. It's very clear there were issues. I actually went to see this patient from Chifundo Clinic in Chaisa, and he had and people don't like that he's a truck driver and an alcoholic. It's a recipe for disaster. So you are I think in here we also agree with the excessive alcohol. He has very poor social support, but this guy is actually a treatment supporter. But if you notice, he even had some syphilis, he has no wife. So all those issues were very important to do. Thank you so much, Dr. Kozia. So insightful. Dr. Mpeta and team.
Nomsa, I'm reporting for from the breakout room 2. So there were similar discussions, very interesting discussions that came out. So the team actually felt that the first point was that probably this was a misdiagnosis, that the patient may not necessarily had HIV type 2. But also there was a mention that in Zambia, we are unable to actually measure viral load for HIV type 2. And then there was a concern that was raised that from the mentorship perspective that probably we need to do better in our facilities if this really is a misdiagnosis, that we have actually done a complete task shifting instead of task sharing. So, and that is the reason why we are getting some of these results that may be false results. So there's need of task sharing so that there's continuous mentorship. And then I think Yeta also brought a very interesting point that probably it may not be a misdiagnosis. There could be a co-infection for this particular patient. Maybe they have both HIV type 1 and HIV type 2, but then the team concentrated on treating HIV type 2, which was a monotherapy, and ignoring HIV type 1. And then the other aspect was the issues, that was for question 1. And then for question 2, also there was a lot of concern was brought in about the social status of this particular patient, like it has already been mentioned with the previous group, that he's alcoholic and he's also a truck driver and so on. And perhaps in the first instance, maybe the team should have done a better job on enhanced adherence counseling. And probably because of the nature of his job, they could have even tailored the time of seeing this particular patient in terms of DST that would fit this particular patient looking at the type of his job, and then they could have done a better enhanced adherence counseling. Then there was an issue of also genotyping for this particular patient to determine whether the patient was actually fading. And then I think the last bit, in terms of the last question, was what could be the best treatment for this particular patient. From the team, they felt probably this patient could continue on the current regime, and also it was said that this patient actually has a chronic kidney disease, is showing that this patient actually needs better attention, should actually be referred to advanced treatment center so that he can actually be monitored a little bit better and put on the right treatment because of the concern on the chronic kidney disease. So I think in a nutshell, that was the concern, that this is a patient that needs to be referred to the advanced center.
Last question.
Thank you. If anyone from the team, Dr. Chipasha, if there's anything I've left, Bosco, you can add on.
Unfortunately, we may not have the time. Madam Nomsa?
Okay, I'm done.
They have. Madam Nomsa, this is a landmark moment. What a good facilitator you are. Well done. You are a great coordinator and even a better facilitator. Well done. Thank you so much. So it's very clear. First, we want to disagree with Yeta, okay? Because this is against everything that Mpanji has talked about.
Sure.
There is no possibility of dual infection here. The moment you think like that, you have problems in management.
Sure.
We did say that it has to be a dark line. HIV-2 was clearly a faint line. So on that one, unfortunately, we removed -1 because we were told if it's faint, it's not 2. So there's no possibility of dual infections. So it was an HIV-1, which they started managing correctly and they didn't. If you look at our Zambian guideline, if someone is failing treatment, we recommend a viral load. We do not recommend you go and start retesting the patient, which is what most of us are now resorting to in our facilities, isn't it? And NOMSA, your group really pointed this out very well. We were lucky we had Mpanji, the expert, he told us our machine does not measure a viral load for HIV-2. Yeah. The moment you have a viral load, you know that there's HIV-1 in there. So we were lucky we had the Mpanji. So this was definitely HIV-1. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. We also really like what you pointed out about task shifting. As evidence, only 40% of our community-based volunteers are doing the right thing, meaning 60% of them, they are giving us results that are doubtful. And it was pointed out by Doug Watson. It's unfortunate he didn't join. But when we did our first HIV-2, he's the one who opened our heads and said, I doubt that this is HIV-2, because we've done so much task shifting that now they are doing wrong things and they are reading things like this as HIV-2. So I think that's important that we question. When we doubt, we need to retest them ourselves. As for them, so I think we had Mr. Mwamba here, and adherence, as everyone has said, they should have really focused on their adherence. But I must say, I met this patient, and I think if there's a patient where it's difficult to get adequate adherence, I know we are saying that they should have done better. It's in a patient who has an alcohol problem, because that may need even psychosocial, they may need a psychiatrist to help wean them off the alcohol for them to adhere. And I agree with both Kozi and Nomsa's group that maybe he was doing well on the TLE. Who knows? As for a drug regime, yes, you can genotype, but you can come up with an empiric regime with AZT3TC with DTG or atazanava with DTG. So unfortunately, the interpretation of 1 and 2 really affected this patient in that they ended up using opiniva in a patient who had profuse diarrhea because they couldn't use atazanava because they thought it was HIV-2. So I think that's very, very important. I think that was, we learned a lot from Mpanji and Mr. Mwaba over here, who said they had a patient who was target non-detectable but had AIDS, proper AIDS, and then CD4s. Well, that's when they went and they tested for HIV-2. So I think in summary, the issue is that even worse than HIV-1 and 2, because this is rare, is when people give people who are HIV negative a result that says, oh, you are positive. Or if I'm positive and I'm told that I'm negative, that's worse. So I think as facilities, we need to take ownership and care for our community-based volunteers. NOMSA has said it very, very well. We have over-task shifted instead of task sharing, okay? Yeah. These are people who are struggling, they may not have completed school, and they are giving patients results that may not be correct. So we need to take ownership when we see something suspicious. Let's check. Like I know I went to a facility where I found the buffer had finished, but test kits were there. It means they were using more drops than they should have been using. So let's pay attention to what they are doing. Dr. Islam, you have a lot of congratulations here. People are saying very, very good case, and thank you for sharing. I hope those recommendations were okay. Dr. Islam.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Sombo Foloshi. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to sharing this case, and we learned a lot. I know we made a mistake. From there we started learning, and that's how it can even help us in future also, because even I observed 1 or 2, after that we had another case where they said it too, I retested and found positive. So immediately after that, I said this is what was happening. So for mentorship, I can just want to share that we sat down with those counselors. We try to upgrade them, because on the algorithm it's very clear. People sometimes they don't read what was there. So just trying to improve their reading skill and to see how can improve their skill as well. I hope we'll be doing fine, and we'll be sharing our any cases. I think because wherever we have challenge, we do share, and that's how we're learning now.
Thank you so much, Islam. I know one other thing we discussed, whereas why when they withdrew the tenofovir, the creatinine kept on going up, isn't it? And we said it's because he kept taking diclofenac for peripheral neuropathy. I'm not sure why someone would take diclofenac for peripheral neuropathy. Sister Makupe, what are we having next week?
Next week's didactic presentation will be on faith-based action for scaling up testing and treatment for the epidemic response by Dr. Chungu.
So we have CRS. CRS has this big project where they're looking at adolescents and children. How do we find them? How do we keep them on treatment? So CRS will be presenting. We hope you will all join us, and thank you very much. If you have these cases, please call 7040. It's there for you, and we've given Mpanji's number.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Islam. Thank you, everyone. I didn't know lab could be so interesting. May we please have some attendance registers when we are done? Thank you so much. That was so interesting.